Welcome to the Wine Nirvana podcast. Wine reviews for the average wine drinker. No pretense, no snobbery, no numerical ratings. And here's our host, Stephen Hawk.
Over the course of my drinking career, I have noted a few dichotomies among drinkers. One is whiskey versus brandy. Another is vodka versus gin. And a third is old world wine versus new world wines. And usually those camps are more or less exclusive. So the question is there a difference between old world wine and new world wine? And if there is, does it matter? So first, much of what I'm going to discuss here today, they're fairly broad generalizations. You know, things are not totally exclusive to one area or another. Both types of wines can be good or bad. Both can be expensive or cheap. So not those criteria do not apply. The big criteria, of course, is geographic, which is to say, Europe and the Middle East is considered the old world district, and everything else is new world. So this would include Southern Africa, North and South America, really any other place. In the old world, they have for centuries relied on a narrow range of traditional grapes, so-called vitis vinifera. The New World does as well, but are much more open to non-traditional wine grapes, of which there are a surprising number. In labeling, Old World wines prominently identify the place that the wine was grown and made. In the New World, the focus is on the grape variety itself. There are also climate differences. In the New World, the climate tends to be warmer, and this leads to fuller fruit flavors and rounder tannins. In the Old World, cooler climates and more restrained tannins and not much, but somewhat less fruit. In the Old World, there is a strong historical focus on terroir. And terroir is a French term which simply means a sense of a place. And that can include the soil, the vineyard, the climate. And Europeans are very much allied with the idea that terroir is perhaps the principal driver of a wine's character. They are sometimes referred to as terroirists. In the New World, terroir plays a role, but it's far less dominant. And the emphasis is on the grape varieties, the winery, and the winemaker himself or herself. New World wines tend, when they are oaked, tend to use more of it, and it's mostly new oak. Now it can be new American or French oak, but it tends to be much. The barrels tend to be reused much less than in Europe, and there's a greater fruit extraction in the wine. In the Old World, those wines tend to be leaner, with tastes of earth and mineral, and again these lean tannins. New World wineries and winemakers are much more open to new and modern ideas. Unfortunately, sometimes industrial ideas, which is not always good for the quality of the wine. In the old world, they are much more bound by their history of the wines, history of the place, the tradition of production, and there are much more specific production regulations tend to be in Europe. Now, in America, there are plenty of distribution regulations as well as sales regulations, but in Europe, there are regulations that dictate a lot of how the wine is actually made. Old world wines also tend to be somewhat more acidic. They are less aromatic and need to be decanted, or at least decanting will benefit an old world wine usually more often than a new world wine. They're also characterized as being tight. There's also less sugar in old world wines, and that residual sugar leads to a lower ABV, or alcohol by volume. In old world wines, the average tends to be around 12%, and in the new world, it's more like 15, even 16%, particularly these days. So in an old world wine, you're going to see elegance, a sense of restraint, again, like I've said, a lean quality, and those wines often need to be paired with food for maximum enjoyment. The New World wines, on the other hand, are opulent, lush, fruit-forward, and they are, as often as not, they're as good by themselves as they are with a meal, although they will certainly pair well with food. Now, the reason, in a certain sense, there's even a contest between the old and the new world is because of what is perhaps the single most important media event in American wine history. And on June the 7th, 1976, Time magazine correspondent George Tabor reported the triumph of California wines at the Paris wine tasting in his article entitled The Judgment of Paris. A clever pun that I won't bore you with now. At this blind tasting contest of Chardonnay and Cabernet Sauvignon from France and California, presided over by an all-French judging panel, California wines rated best in each category. New York City's Acker, Merrill, and Condit claims to be, quote, America's oldest wine shop, quote. By noon of the day after Tabor's story appeared, the store sold out of the 5 cases of wine it had from Chateau Montelena and Freemark Abbey, who were the 2 California wineries that had participated in the Paris tasting in the white wine selection. The former had ranked first, and the latter winery 7th out of 10 participants, forever altering the American wine industry and igniting the boom in American wine that continues to this day. And by the way, Stag's Leap won the red category. The 2008 movie Bottle Shock dramatized this contest, and I recommend it. It's on Amazon Prime if you have a subscription, or $3 on YouTube. To illustrate kind of what I've been talking about with these differences, I found 2 reviews of a Merlot and 2 reviews of a Sauvignon Blanc, which kind of illuminate some of these different characteristics. So the first was a 2008 Rombauer Merlot from California. The Wine Spectator said, this elegant, focused version delivers currant and floral herb aromas and appealing cherry, caramel, and spice flavors. And the Spectator was quick to announce the fruit characteristics of this wine first, and also discuss caramel and spice, which indicate oak aging. Floral herb is mentioned as an aroma, but not a flavor, saying that this wine may smell complex, but tastes more fruity. Rombauer has long been known for making very fruit-forward wines in the past, and Wine Spectator says this one is not as bold or lush as the others, with the word elegant. From the Old World, a 2009 Chateau Sirac Merlot, Robert Parker, the famous wine critic, said this had attractive truffle, graphite, and plum notes intermixed with mocha and black cherry cascade, which cascade from the glass of the supple, chunky, fleshy wine. Fleshy is also a term you're going to hear more applied to Old World and New World wines. He continues, there's good glycerin, purity, and overall character to this wine, which can be drunk over the next decade. Parker reveals the most prevalent flavors of this wine first in his description of Chateau Sirac. By saying the words graphite, truffle, and chunky, he is telling us that the wine is more earthy. Again, a classic European characteristic. The indication of its expected age-worthiness of a decade, Parker is saying that the wine has the four components that make a wine age-worthy. This does not mean that the wine will necessarily drink well now. And here's a note on aging. About 10 years ago, I gave up on cellaring wines to age them, in part because I'm getting older. And the other reason was that I found that a lot of the characteristics I like, again, particularly in new world wines, that robust fruit forwardness, gripping tannins, those are the kinds of flavors that tend to get rounded off with aging. And I was finding that I just preferred the wines young. So to compare a white, we have a Sauvignon Blanc from the Loire versus a Sauvignon Blanc from New Zealand, which is a famous area for Sauv Blanc. The New Zealand was a 2011 Brancott Sauvignon Blanc. Wine and Spirits said, Brancott sets the style for clean, oceanic Marlborough Sauvignon with this mouth-watering wine. There's a touch of flint in the aroma, bright passion fruit flavors, and fresh acidity to balance it. Wine and Spirits suggests that the wine has a unique mineral aroma, but says that overall it tastes of passion fruit. Passion fruit in Sauvignon Blanc is a ripe flavor, whereas flavors like lemon and pepper indicate a less ripe grape. And then we can compare this with the 2011 Les Roches Touraine Blanc from France. KO Wines wrote, intense classic nose of cut grass, a classic nose which I do not particularly enjoy. Pepper and, believe it or not, pineapples and lemons with plenty of minerality, very crisp and refreshing. KO Wines points out that this wine has a classic note of cut grass. Picking flavors other than fruit shows that this wine has more savory flavors. Sauvignon Blanc from France tends to lean towards more herbaceous and mineral flavors. And as a postscript, I personally am very much a New World guy, New World wine guy. And the reason for this goes back to my very first days of drinking wine. I had a coworker at the time whose father had immigrated on the boat to America from France. And after being here just a few short weeks, announced to his family that although he loved his French wine and would certainly drink it on any trips back to the old country, the shipment over ruined the wines, and that he was forthwith drinking American wines, mostly from California, as long as he lived in America, which he did for the rest of his life. Well, as a young, impressionable man, that struck me as if a Frenchman can say, I'm in America, I'm going to drink American wines, I felt that was good enough for me. And to this day, probably 90% of my wine consumption and enjoyment is centered around American wines. So, also South America. Chile and Argentina are making some tremendous wines these days at a very good value. So, maybe this will help focus your own palate. Like I say, there's no right answer here. I certainly have friends who find New World wines to be way too fruity and consequently not serious, and they're at the opposite end of the spectrum. They drink 90% Old World. So, like I say, there's no right answer. It's just a question of what do you like? Drink what you like. Thanks for listening.
This has been Wine Nirvana. To learn more, visit us at www.winenirvana.com.
This is a production of Habanero Media.